Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled, and Mirtz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Tes Vav Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Reish Tes Vav Amud Aleph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch at the beginning of the line. Ve'im hachitzainim prutzim b'miluam la'emtzai. In Siman Shin Samach, we're in the middle of Sif Gimel. Our learning today should be a schus. V'achenu kabeis Yisrael anasunu batzara b'shivya ha'imdim bei bayam ubein bayabasha hamakayim yerachem aleihem v'yetziem mitzar l'rvacha me'afela la'oira mishibud l'geula hashta b'gala uvizman kariv and amar amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Moiri v'Rabbi Reb Shalom Ruvain ben Shima, for Achia Gadol Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel, for Yitzchak ben Zion ben Dusha, Rivka bas Shira Leah, Chavadasa bas Rezel Serel, Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, Gila Shifra bas Ilana Udel. They should all have a refuah shalema b'seich shar chayla Yisrael. So here in Siman Shin Samach, we've been discussing the halacha of people who are out in the bika. The bika, the plains, the prairie, rolling plains of grain, they're out in the bika, which has a din of a carmelis. What's the halacha of a carmelis? You're not allowed to be metaltal yosef b'dalad amas in a carmelis. These people know that they're stuck there for Shabbos. They're going to be out in the bika for Shabbos. They can't have a situation where for the entire Shabbos they can't be metaltal yosef b'dalad amas. So they want to set up a little bit of an encampment. And they want to make an enclosure so that they can turn that enclosure into a bona fide Rishus HaYachid, and now they should be able to be metaltal Yosef Midalad Amas. Okay, they take the materials that they have at hand, and they make an enclosure. But the enclosure that they make is made out of mechitzais geruais. They're weak, flimsy mechitzas. Flimsy, I mean halachically flimsy. What kind of mechitza is this? So the Mechaber told us we're talking about mechitzas that are made shesi beloy erev. Maybe it's mechitzas that are made out of vertical posts that are stuck into the ground, and the gap between the vertical posts is less than the sheer lavud. It's less than 3 tvachim. So we view all of those gaps as being closed. So by putting up all of these vertical posts, we are creating a halachic enclosure around this entire encampment, but it is shesi below erev. It's only vertical posts. There's nothing going horizontally. Or he did the opposite. Maybe he had ropes. So he put up a post at one corner, a post at the other corner, a post at the other 2 corners, and then he tied ropes going horizontally from post to post to post, and you have the ground, and then less than 3 tvachim, you have a rope, and then less than 3 tvachim, another rope, and then less than 3 tvachim, another rope, a rope at the top, and then you've created an enclosure, you've created mechitzais that are at least 10 tvachim tall. Once again, we're employing the halacha l'moshe misina of lavud. We're closing the gaps that exist between the horizontal ropes, and again, we've created an enclosure, but once again, it's a mechitza gerua, because now it's erev, you have horizontal ropes, bali shesi. There's no vertical posts. Yes, there's a vertical post at each corner, but the vertical posts are separated by much more than 3 tvachim, and therefore you cannot employ lavud, so the vertical posts are not negeya in the context of the creation of the mechitza. The mechitza is created out of the erev, out of the horizontal ropes. Okay. So they're out in the bika, they've created this enclosure made out of mechitzais geruais. We learned here in Shin Samach that when you create mechitzais made out of mechitzais geruais, Chazal slapped a restriction on you. What's the restriction? Yes, you could go ahead and create an enclosure, and if you create that enclosure, you're allowed to be metaltal, yosef b'dalad amas, because really midaraisa inside this enclosure is a Rishus HaYachid, but you can only enclose an area up to a beis sasayim. You can only enclose an area up to 5,000 square amas. If you exceed 5,000 square amas, then your mechitzais are bottle or mavotel. It's as if they're not here. You're back to a carmelis. You can't be metaltal yosef b'dalad amas. Now, that's true by one person who's alone. He's limited to 5,000 square amas. It's true by two people that are camping together in the same enclosure. Again, they're restricted to a Beis Hasayim. They're restricted to 5,000 square amas. But once you have three people, now you have a din of a shayara. Now you have a din of a caravan. A caravan, once you're a shayara, you could enclose, even with mechitzais geruais, you can enclose as large an area as you want. But once again, there's a caveat. When we say that you're allowed to enclose as large an area as you want, not so quick. For three people, you get a freebie up to 6,000, up to 6 saw. You could go ahead, enclose 6 saw. That's 2 saw per person. And even if you're only going to use a little bit of the enclosure, you're going to use 1 base saw, let's say, of the enclosure, and the other 5 base saw are going to be empty, we don't care. Two base saw, a base saw sign per person, that's a freebie. That you get with no restrictions. But if you go over 6 base saw, once you go over 6 base saw, now there's a new requirement. You can't have base sasayim. You can't have 2 saw that are ponui that you're not using. You can't have 2 saw that are empty and not being used. So 6 saw, no problem. You're all good. You have 3 people, you have a shayara, 6 saw, I don't care how much you're using. But let's say you do 7 saw. If you do 7 saw, so if you're using all 7, gesundheit hate. You do 8, you're using all 8, gesundheit hate. But what if you do 7 and you're only using 5? If you do 7, you exceeded the 6 that you get for 3 people, which is okay, you're allowed to exceed that, but you're only using 5. So that means you're leaving 2 saw panui. Once you leave 2 saw panui, now all of your mechitzas are bottle. You're back to being a carmelis. You're not allowed to be metaltal, yoyse midalad amas, inside your flimsy enclosure made out of mechitzais geruais. Now, yesterday, we went into a lengthy discussion of different scenarios of how an enclosure could be set up. We have 3 people now that are out in the Bika, Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. They each set up an encampment. They set up camp next to each other. And we started going into the halacha. When could we consider the 3 people? When can we consider the 3 people to be camping together? And we're going to consider the enclosure a shayara and give them as much room as they want? Or when do we look at it and say, no, these are 3 individuals, and therefore each one only gets a beis sasayim. They only get 2 saw. That's what we started with yesterday. We saw one scenario yesterday. We're going to go to a second scenario today. Now, I really introduced this already yesterday, but we didn't get to it inside the mechaber. So let me just show you the diagram over here. So way up front, you know which scenario we're going to be discussing, and then we'll be able to look at it inside. So here's the scenario. You've got Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. They're out in the Bika. They're camping. Ruvain set up his enclosure over here on this side. Shimon set up his enclosure in the middle. Levi set up his enclosure on the other side. Now, I didn't draw this to scale, so don't get hung up right now on the fact that Shimon's enclosure seems to be a lot larger than Ruvain's and Levi's. You can imagine that they're actually all the same size. Ruvain's enclosure, Shimon's enclosure, Levi's enclosure, they're all next to each other. Question is, do we consider them to be a shayara, and therefore they get as much room as they want, or are they considered to be 3 individuals? Now, looking at the diagram, you'll see right away, and I wrote it in a note at the top. I hope that the note is not mirror image to you. It shouldn't be. In this scenario, you see right away that the 2 outside enclosures, Ruvain's enclosure and Levi's enclosure, are nifratz b'miluai to Shimon's enclosure. They're wide open from the sides out into the middle. If you're here in Reuven's enclosure, for me it's easier to point over here, if you're here in Levi's enclosure, and you look from Levi out to Shimon, you don't see any mechitzos that are interfering. You don't see any partitions between your enclosure and Shimon's enclosure, right? This wall over here is flush to these gifufim. The gifufim, the partial walls, are not visible from inside Levi's enclosure. They're visible from Shimon's enclosure. So Shimon is not nifratz b'miluai to Levi, but Levi is nifratz b'miluai to Shimon. And so too on this side. Reuven is nifratz b'miluai to Shimon. Shimon is not nifratz b'miluai to Reuven because he's got these gifufim. Now, we already learned the halacha yesterday that when you have one area that's nifratz b'miluai to the other area, the one that's nifratz b'miluai to the other one is kind of bottled to the other one. So in this scenario, where Levi is nifratz b'miluai to Shimon, we don't really look at Levi's enclosure as being a completely separate enclosure. Instead, we look at Levi's enclosure as kind of serving Shimon's enclosure. Because after all, Levi doesn't really have any kind of partitions between him and Shimon. So then, therefore, we kind of look at Levi as being sort of bottled to Shimon, meaning, you see the arrows that I drew here, Shimon could be sort of flowing into Levi. We could sort of look at Levi's enclosure here as sort of being an extension of Shimon's. It's true that from Shimon's vantage point, you have gifufim, but from Levi's vantage point, there are no gifufim. That makes Levi's enclosure over here a little bit less choshev than Shimon's. Now, in the context of the halacha that we're learning here, what that does is, it means that we could view Shimon as really being together with Levi. So too on the other side, we could really view Shimon as kind of being together with Reuven. Now, does that help us? No, it really doesn't. Why? Because no matter what, whether Shimon goes to Levi or Shimon goes to Reuven, the bottom line is you only have three people here and they're in three separate enclosures. Even if Shimon's going to go to Levi, you have two. If Shimon's by Reuven, you have two. Now, 2 and 1 are the same din. The same way 1 is encumbered and he could only go up to 5,000 square amas, 2 are also encumbered and they can only go up to 5,000 square amas. So, as long as we only have 3 people here, this doesn't help us. But the next thing that we're going to discuss are cases where you have more than 3 people. What if you have 2 people here by Levi and you have 2 people by Shimon, by Reuven? What if there are 2 people in each of the outer enclosures? Well, in that case, let's say you have here Reuven and Shimon would be in this enclosure. Well, in that case, since they're nifratz b'miluai to Shimon, Shimon could really be seen as joining them. In that case, you have a shayara out here by Reuven. If you have over here, if you would have 2 people, Levi and Yehuda, over here, and Shimon over here, well, Shimon could really be seen as joining Levi and Yehuda. In that case, you have a shayara. And that's where we're going to see, then the halacha could change. Now let's start seeing this inside. I think against that backdrop, it'll be easier understood. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines off the bottom on Reish Tes Vav Amud Aleph. V'im achitzonim. V'im achitzonim, if the 2 outer enclosures are prutzim b'miluam le'emtzoi, they're completely breached, wide open to the middle one. That's the picture that I just showed you. V'emtzoi megupaf, but the middle one has the gifufim, right? From Shimon's vantage point, you have these gifufim, both going to Levi and going to Reuven. You have the partial walls. V'yachid b'chol echad, but you only have 1 in each one of the enclosures. You have Reuven and Shimon in the outer ones, and you have Levi in the inner one. Ein nois b'chol echad ela beis sasayim. Well, in that case, each one is only going to get a beis sasayim. They're only going to get 2 sa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, prutzim b'miluam kazeh. You see there's a little diagram there in the Mishnah Berurah. Shoyem tzoi rachav bin shtei achitzonim. In the scenario that we're giving now, the middle enclosure, right? Shimon's enclosure is wider than the 2 outer ones. Ois Katan Yotes Ela Beis Sasayim. Each one is only going to get 2 sa. Because the outer ones can't join the middle one. Ruvain and Levi that are in the 2 outer enclosures, they can't be seen as joining Shimon in the middle. Why not? Because from Shimon's vantage point, there's a big stop sign going to Ruvain or going to Levi. Now, the way it's written over here, and that is the way it is, Ruvain and Levi cannot be seen as joining Shimon in the middle. Why? Because where Shimon is, there are gifufim going to the 2 enclosures on the outside. So Shimon is walled off. Since Shimon is walled off, we cannot say that Ruvain on one end, Levi on the other end, are together with Shimon in the middle. So could we make a shayara in the middle? No, we can't. Stop signs, gifufim, between the middle enclosures and the outer enclosures. Ve'enoi paritz b'miluai lehem, because Shimon is not paritz b'miluai to the outer enclosures. Va'af shehu yachal lehitztaref im kol echad me'achitzainim. Now Shimon could really go either to Ruvain or to Levi, because the outer enclosures are very welcoming to the middle enclosure. The outer enclosures are nifratz b'miluam to the middle enclosure. So the outer enclosures, very welcoming to Shimon. Shimon, you want to come join me? Levi, you want to come join me? Ruvain, go ahead. You could be mitzaref with us in the outer enclosures, mitam shein prutzim loy b'miluai, because they're nifratz b'miluam to the middle. V'nechshav kiluhu dar b'rishusam v'chanal. So yeah, we could say that it's as if Shimon is with Ruvain, or it's as if Shimon is with Levi. But mikol makom, it's not going to help us. Ein b'chol echad mehem el shnayim. Very nice. Throw Shimon to Ruvain. So you've got 2 by Ruvain. Throw Shimon to Levi. You've got 2 by Levi. 2, 1, same halacha. You're limited to a Beis Sasayim. Okay, now, fine. So in that scenario, can we create a shayara? No, we can't create a shayara. So now that we can't create a shayara, what's the halacha? Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, each one in their own enclosure, are limited to a Beis Sasayim. They're limited to 5,000 square amas. Oh, so now, says the Mishnah Berurah, once we understand that, 4 lines from the bottom, V'him echad mehachitzainim yoiseh mi Beis Sasayim. Let's say one of the outer enclosures broke the rules. Let's say this mirror image stuff. Let's say Ruvain broke the rules. And let's say Ruvain made his enclosure larger than a Beis Sasayim. So what's going to happen? Ruvain's enclosure is going to turn back into a carmelis, right? His mechitzos, geruos, are going to be void because he made his enclosure bigger than a Beis Sasayim. So Ruvain's not allowed to be metaltal yoiseh b'daled amos. Is that going to affect Shimon? No, because Shimon is not nifratz b'miluai to Ruvain. If Shimon was nifratz b'miluai l'makom ha'aser, if Shimon was completely breached to Ruvain, then just like Ruvain can't be metaltal yoiseh b'daled amos in his enclosure, Shimon wouldn't be allowed to be metaltal yoiseh b'daled amos in his enclosure. But lucky Shimon, he's not nifratz b'miluai to Ruvain because he's got gifufim, so it doesn't affect him. How about Levi? Is Levi affected by Ruvain? No, Levi's not affected by Ruvain. Why would Levi be affected by Ruvain? In order for Levi to be affected by Ruvain, he would have to be picking up the Isser all the way from Ruvain. Well, there are gifufim between Levi and Ruvain. These gifufim over here. So, against that backdrop, says the Mechaber, if one of the outer enclosures broke the rules and went over the Beis Sasayim, hu levada yoser. That enclosure is going to be a carmelis, and that enclosure is going to be also betiltal yoser b'daled amos. But it's levadoi, says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chaf, hu levadoi oser v'lo ha'imtzai. That iser isn't going to transfer to the middle. Sharei hu megupa feiner partzloi. He's not nifratz b'miluai l'makom ha'aser. He's got gifufim. V'choshken achitzan hasheni shu rachok b'menu. Certainly the outer enclosure on the other side is not going to be affected by the opposite outer enclosure on the other side. He's far away. There's a middle enclosure in the middle, and he's got kifufim between him and the other outer enclosure. Okay. Going weiter in the Mechaber, 4 lines off the bottom near the end of the line. Let's say Shimon in the middle broke the rules. Let's say Shimon made his enclosure. Oh, now you have a problem. Well, Shimon made his enclosure. Shimon is also betiltel Yosef b'dalad amas. He exceeded his beis asayim. Ruvain and Levi are nifratz b'miluam to Shimon. So now they're nifratz b'miluay l'makam ha'aser. So says the Mechaber, gam achitzayim asurim. Now the outer enclosures will also be also betiltel Yosef b'dalad amas. Sharei heim prutzim l'makam ha'aser lehem. Because they're nifratz b'miluay l'makam ha'aser. Okay. Is there a Mishnah Berurah here? No. Okay, now let's go weiter. Now we're going to tweak the case a little bit, and now we're going to start adding people. Now, when I show you the diagram that we're going to use, don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot of chicken scratchings. There's a lot of writing on the diagram. Different parts of it are going to be negeya to different pieces of the Mechaber and different Mishnah Berurahs, so we're not going to have to look at them all at once. Now says the Mechaber like this. Aval. Im echad b'chol echad me'achitzonim u'shnayim ba'emtzoi. Let's say, first I'll use the same diagram. I don't even need the diagram. You know what this looks like. The middle enclosure is the bigger one. The outer enclosures are the smaller ones. The outer enclosures are nifratz b'miluam to the middle one, so they're accessories to the middle one. Says the Mechaber. Aval im echad b'chol echad me'achitzonim. Let's say you have one person in each of the outer accessory enclosures. Ushnayim ba'emtzoi. And you have 2 people in the middle one. So Reuven and Shimon are in the middle enclosure. Levi and Yehuda are in the outer enclosures. Well, do the math, right? Reuven and Shimon, who are in the middle, could be seen as joining either one of the outer ones, because the outer ones are seen as accessories to the middle one. Okay, if Reuven and Shimon go to Levi, there's a shayara by Levi. If Reuven and Shimon go to Yehuda, there's a shayara by Yehuda. Now guess what? They don't have to choose which one they go to. Halakhically, they're allowed to belong to either one for any part of Shabbos. So now you have a shayara. Says the Mechaber, Im echad b'chol echad me'achitzonim u'shnayim ba'emtzoi. You got Reuven and Shimon in the middle, Levi and Yehuda on the outside, or oy shnayim b'chol echad me'achitzonim. Maybe you have Reuven and Shimon in one outer enclosure, Levi and Yehuda in the other outer enclosure, ve'echad b'emtzoi, and Dan is in the middle. Well, Dan has the luxury of joining either one of the outsides, because the outsides are their accessories. They're nifratz b'miluay to the middle. So now, if Dan goes to Reuven and Shimon, shayara by Reuven and Shimon. If Dan goes to Levi and Yehuda, shayara by Levi and Yehuda. He has the option to go anywhere he wants. So boom, guess what? You've got your shayara. So So now the Mechaber says, and for this you have to halt up a little bit, you have to remember what we learned yesterday. Noistin lishnei hachitzainim kol tzarcham. Now, says the Mechaber, in either one of these scenarios, 1 in the middle, 2 on the outsides, or 2 in the middle, 1 on each of the outsides, guess what? Each of the outsides become a shayara, right? Think this through. You've got 1 in the middle, 2 on the outsides. Dan is in the middle. Dan could go to Reuven and Shimon on one side. He could go to Levi and Yehuda on the other side. Either way, you have a shayara on both outsides. Or Reuven and Shimon are in the middle. Levi is on one outside. Yehuda is on the other outside. Guess what? Reuven and Shimon could go to either outside. Again, either one of the outsides is considered a shayara. So says the Mechaber, Noistin l'shnei hachitzainim kol tzarcham. Now the outsides, in either one of these scenarios, the outsides are going to be considered a shayara. What's the halacha by a shayara? You give them kol tzarcham. They could be as big as they want, as long as they don't exceed 6 sa and leave 2 sa empty. That's why the lashon of the mechaber is kol tzarcham. They get whatever they need, because they could go as big as they want as long as they use it all and they don't leave 2 sa empty. And why is this true? Because in our case, where the 2 outsides are nifratz bimuluam to the middle, the 2 outsides are accessories to the middle. Whoever is in the middle could be seen as joining either one of the outsides. So you've got 1 in the middle, 2 in the outsides. Okay, you could have 3 in either outside. So the outsides are shayaros. You have 2 in the middle, 1 on each outside. The 2 in the middle could join either outside. Again, the outsides are shayaros. So the outsides could be as big as they want. Now notice, the mechaber does not say that the middle could be as big as you want. The reason for that is because that's totally on the machlokes that we learned in the mechaber yesterday, the day Rishona and the day Shnia. The mechaber over here is going according to the day Shnia. The day Rishona said, once you have a shayara anywhere, everything else becomes a chotzer to the shayara. The whole place becomes a shayara. According to the day Rishona, the 2 outsides are shayaros. The middle is a chotzer to the outsides. Even the middle could be bigger than a beis hasayim. But we're going now according to the day Shnia. The day Shnia said no. The outsides are shayaros. The middle is not a shayara, right? The middle could go to either outside, but the outsides can't go to the middle. So the math does not make the middle a shayara. The math only makes the outside shayaros. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chaf Aleph, the Kashivi, Kumash B'Yarna Tam, Leil B'Sif Katan Yud Daled. This is all based on the same math that we learned yesterday. Is Katan Chaf Beis, Ki'ilu Hu Bachid Tzainim. The middle could always be seen as joining the outsides. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chaf Beis, Ritzayna Laimar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, Im Kol Echad Me'achid Tzainim. Whoever's in the middle could join whoever's on the outsides. But the Mechaber is saying over here, like I just spoke out, that the middle is still going to be restricted to a beis hasayim, because in no way can the middle become a shayara. If you have 1 in the middle, he could go join the 2 on one side or the 2 on the other side and make the outsides a shayara. But the 2s on the outsides can't come to the middle. The middle is magupaf. So too, if there's 2 in the middle and there's 1 in the outsides, the 2 could join the 1s on the outsides, but the 1s on the outsides can't join the 2 in the middle. So there's no math that allows you to make the middle a shayara. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chol zehu rak l'deya hayeshomer. This is according to the day Shnia from yesterday's shir. Avlu deya rishona, according to the more makel deya rishona, kishem shachitzayim nasim sham chatzer leemtzai. Just like we saw yesterday, that when the middle is the narrow one and the outside ones are the big ones, if the outside ones, if the middle one becomes a shayara, the outside ones are viewed as a chotzer to the shayara, and they could be as big as they want. Kain b'in yonenu. So too over here. Nasohim tzoy k'chotzer lachitzoynais v'shari gam boy kol tzarchai. According to the day Rishona, the middle one in our scenario, even though it can't be a shayara, it's an accessory to the shayaras, and it will also be mutter as big as they want it to be. Okay, now the mechaber starts to get a little bit more complicated, but it's really not complicated, Rabbi Isai. We just have to follow. We just have to pay attention to the details and follow along. Says the mechaber on the bottom line near the end of the line. Bamed dvarim amurim. When is this true? When do we say this? Now, what's a little funny over here is that the mechaber does not identify which halacha he's referring to. Bamed dvarim amurim. When do we say this? When do we say what? So let me clue you in over here. Just 1 second. Okay. Bamed dvarim amurim. When do we say this? When do we say what? So one of the halachas that we just learned was that in this case over here, the case that we've been dealing with, let's say that we only have the one person in each enclosure. We have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, each one in an enclosure. So we said that in that case, the halacha is everybody is stuck with only a beis sasayim. And we understand why. Even though Reuven and Levi are nifratz b'miluam to Shimon, Shimon could go in either direction, but how does that help us? No matter where Shimon goes, you only have two. So there's no way to make a shayar over here, right? Now, one halacha that we said as a result of that is that if somebody breaks the rules, right? Let's say one of the outer enclosures breaks the rules and they exceed a beis sasayim. What happens then? Well, let's say Reuven went over a beis sasayim. Reuven is going to be aser. He's going to be aser b'til yosim midalid. Is Shimon going to be aser? No. You know why? Because Shimon's not nifratz b'miluay to Reuven. He's not nifratz b'miluay l'makam aser. And he has gifufim. Is Levi going to be aser? Certainly not. Levi's all the way on the other side. And Levi is also megupaf to Reuven. He's also megupaf to Reuven, right? Because of these gifufim over here. Those gifufim are not just between Shimon and Reuven, they're also between Levi and Reuven. This is what the Mechaber is referring to. Bamed dvarim amurim. When do we say this halacha that if one of the chitzonim broke the rules and went over 5,000 square amas, now that enclosure is also b'tiltal yosem idalid, but nobody else's? When do we say that? Bamed dvarim amurim kishe'enam. Sorry, just somebody's trying to call me, and my watch is driving me crazy. Okay. Bamed dvarim amurim. When is this true? Kishe'enam psuchim zeh lazeh yoser me'eser. So now the Mechaber is starting to qualify things a little bit. When is it true that the outer enclosure that broke the rules is going to be aser, but it will not affect Shimon or Reuven? Let's say Levi broke the rules. It won't affect Shimon because Shimon's not nifratz b'miluay to Levi. When is that true? That's only true if this opening over here is not more than 10 amos. If it's not psuchim zeh lazeh yoser me'eser. De'im kain, because if that opening is wider than 10 amos, havele pirza, then it's a bona fide breach. It's no longer could be viewed, let's say, as a pesach, as a door or a shar. De'im kain havele pirza, v'gam hamigufafin asurim. If that breach is a serious breach, if that breach is wider than 10 amos, then the kifufim don't help. Then the kifufim don't take away the halacha of nifratz biluay l'makayim ha'asa. Says the Mishnah Berurah. And this Mishnah Berurah is on Reish Tesvav Amud Beis. Mishnah Berurah is Kanchav Gimel. Havele pirza, now it's a real bona fide pirza. The gam gufafin, and even the middle enclosure, even though there are gefufim between the middle enclosure and the outer enclosure that broke the rules, or the other outer enclosure all the way on the other side, they're going to be aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah. So now the Mishnah Berurah tells you what I told you. This is going back on the halacha that we learned earlier, that when the middle one is wider than the outer ones, so it has gifufim between it and the outer enclosures. And one of the outer enclosures broke the rules and exceeded a beis sasayim, duhu nesar, the outer enclosure that broke the rules becomes also b'tiltal yosem idalid, v'hamegupaf mutter, and the other ones are mutter. When is that true? V'alzeh ka'amar, on that the Mechaber is saying, that if the opening between the middle and the outer enclosure that broke the rules is wider than 10 amos, nispatel shem hamechitza me'abegupaf, then the gefufim no longer make a mechitza. And now the middle is considered nifratz b'miluay to the outer. The outer broke the rules, so it's also b'tiltal yosem idalid. Now the middle is nifratz b'miluay l'makam ha'aser, u'memela gama b'gupaf aser, and now the middle is also going to be aser. And I assume the one on the other side is also going to be aser. Va'ayin b'bir halacha, and take a look in the bir halacha where they bring down a dissenting opinion. Okay. Next halacha. Again, a little bit without identifying what. We're going back on something, but the Mechaber doesn't identify what. V'chol zeh, all of this. Okay, what's all of this? So all of this means that in our case, where we said that since the middle is bigger than the sides, and the sides are nifratz b'miluai to the middle, so now if you have, let's say, 2 in each of the outer ones and 1 in the middle, or you have 2 in the middle and 1 in each of the outer ones, we said everything becomes mutter. Why does everything become mutter? Because the middle, well, everything becomes mutter according to the day of Rishona from yesterday. According to the day of Shnia from yesterday, only the outer ones will become mutter, right? Again, I'm confusing the issue a little bit, but what did we say? We said if you have, let's say, 2 in the middle and 1 on each of the sides, or 2 on each of the sides and 1 in the middle, so then the middle could join the sides. Either way, the sides are going to become shayoris, because now the sides are going to have 3, right? That's what we said. Qualifies the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says, V'chol zeh, all of that is true, only we have to add a detail. It can't be just like this picture here. It has to be a little bit more complicated. V'chol zeh, kishekoslei ketana, and I'll show you a picture. V'chol zeh kishekoslei aktana, this is only true if the walls of the smaller, narrower outside enclosures, nichnasin ligedola, extend into the bigger middle enclosure. That's requirement number 1. Ukishekosle ktana, and when those sections of wall that extend into the middle, muflagim shloisha tfachim, are distanced at least 3 tfachim, more than the sheer lavud, mikosle oirech hagedola, from the side walls of the bigger enclosure. What did we just say? Okay, let me show you. The 2 requirements that the Mishnah Berurah, that the Mechaber is making now, are as follows. Here we have our outer enclosure, right? See, here we have the side wall of the outer enclosure. Now, in the previous picture, the side wall of the outer enclosure ended here at the corner, and then it went up for the extension of the larger middle enclosure. Says the Mechaber, in order for this halacha to be true, okay, look at my picture here. You've got Levi is alone in the middle. He's 1 in the middle. You've got Yehuda and Dan over here. You've got Reuven and Shimon over here. We said the halacha is Levi could go in either direction, right? Because Reuven is nifratz b'miluam to Reuven and Shimon are nifratz b'miluam to Levi. Yehuda and Dan are nifratz b'miluam to Levi. So the outer enclosures are accessories to the middle. So Levi could be seen as joining Reuven and Shimon. He could be seen as joining Yehuda and Dan. Either way, on the outsides, you now have a shayara. That's the halacha that we said. Says the Mechaber, in order for this to work, there are 2 requirements that we have to add. We have to say that the side wall of the small enclosure doesn't stop at the corner where the wall of the extension of the middle enclosure comes. No, it has to extend into the middle enclosure, that blue line over here. So it's got to extend over here beyond the gefufim, so to down here. This wall has to extend beyond the gefufim into the middle enclosure, so to here and here. The walls of the outer enclosures have to extend into the middle enclosure. Requirement number 1. Requirement number 2. The distance between that piece of wall and the outer wall of the middle enclosure has to be more than 3 tfachim. It has to be more than the sheer lavud. Now, why is this all true? The reason this is true is because here what we're worried about. Our whole halakha that we learned in Mechaber hinges upon the fact that the outer enclosures are nifratz b'miluam to the middle. But that's not so simple. You know why? Because until now we've been saying that these gifufim serve to cut the middle off from the sides, but not the sides off of the middle. The sides are accessories to the middle because they're nifratz b'miluam. Why are they nifratz b'miluam? Because there's no walls here. There's walls out here. These walls are visible from in here, but they're not visible from in here. But there's an additional complication, and that is that really the halacha is that in a case like this, where the gifufim are what's called nirim mibachutz, they could be seen from outside this enclosure. They could be seen from here, right? You could see them here. They're not nirim mibifnim. They're nirim mibachutz, and they're shaveh mibifnim. What does shaveh mibifnim mean? Means that from the inside, you don't see any protrusion. The walls all seem straight from in here. You have a straight wall here, straight wall here. You have nothing protruding into the middle. The halacha is that really when we have that kind of scenario, really we say that this wall halachically extends into the middle, and this wall halachically extends into the middle. That would be this dotted line. That's what the Mechaber is trying to get away from. So the Mechaber says, in order to get away from that, there's two things you have to do. One is, these walls have to extend into the middle enclosure so that they intersect or bisect this wall. They cut them off. Since this wall is cutting off this wall can't be seen as extending into the middle. That's the basic requirement. The second requirement, he said that this wall has to be more than the sheer lava distanced from this wall. Why? Because if this wall is within the sheer lava of this wall, then we look at this space over here as being closed. Now, I'm just going to shade it in. If that space would be closed, Rabbi Isai, right? I just shaded that area. Okay? If this space would be considered closed, so then this extension doesn't do anything. Then we don't look at this extension as bisecting this wall, because this wall is not here. This wall is actually here, right? We're going to consider all of this closed, because if this is within sheer lava to this, then this gap doesn't exist. This gap is closed. In that case, this wall extends all the way to here and goes like this. And once again, you have the same problem. It's nirim mibachutz v'shaveh mibifnim, and it would be a halachic wall. Okay, so let's just see the words inside. The words over here were, said the Mechaber, V'chol zeh kishekoslei ktana nichdasim l'gedola, the walls of the smaller, narrower outside enclosures have to extend into the wider, larger middle enclosure. Ukeshekoslei ktana muflagim shloishet tefachim mikoslei arech hagdola, and those extensions have to be more than 3 tefachim away from the opposite outer walls of the larger enclosure, like I showed you in the diagram. Let's pause over there in the Mechaber for a second. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the cholzeh kishakosle. What's the cholzeh? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kaya had the kosav la'el, avalam echad b'chol ha'echad me'achitzainim. It's going back on the cases either with is 1 in the middle and 2 on each of the outers, or 2 in the middle and 1 on each of the outers, and thus we can have a shayara in the outers. When is that true, that we can have a shayara in the outers? It's only true because the outers are nifratz b'miluam to the middle. But that's only true. The walls of the outer enclosures have to bisect the walls of the inner enclosure. They have to cut them off. Mishnah Berurah says, like I showed you a picture, and I'm saying like I showed you a picture. Now, muflagim, and also those walls have to be distanced more than 3 tefachim. Return loymar, sheyesh ben kitzei koslei aktana ad koslei agdola shloish tefachim. What those words mean is there has to be from the ends of this wall, the end of this wall. What's called the end of this wall? The extension that it continues into the middle. There has to be between that, says the Mishnah Berurah, bein ktsei koslei haktana, between the ends of the wall of the small enclosure, ad koslei agdola, until the wall of the big enclosure, that's this wall, it has to be shloisha tvachim. You have to have 3 tvachim or more. It has to be more than the sheer lavud. Now, we are going to skip for the moment, go back into the Mechaber, and end of the second line by the Ois Cotton Chav Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah, we are going to skip for the moment the next phrase. We're going to skip from there until after the parentheses that say Ayin L'Kamon Siman Shin Ayin Dalet Sif Gimel. We're skipping to the word Di'im. Says the Mechaber, Di'im Loikein, because if you don't have these two requirements, if the wall doesn't bisect the wall of the bigger one, and it's not distanced more than 3 tvachim, Di'im Loikein, Havele Nira Mi Bachutz V'Shava Mi Bifnim, V'Nidoin Mishum Lechi. And then we're going to apply the same halacha that we would apply to a lechi. We'll see what that means in a minute. V'kulam chashuvin migubafin. And then all of the enclosures would be considered cut off from each other with gifufim. Why? Because like I told you, if you don't have this scenario, then this wall is halachically considered continuing. Now, if that wall continues, Rabbi say, if this wall continues, so then there are gifufim between here and here, because this wall is continuing. If this wall continues, then there are gifufim between here and here. And then the middle is not nifratz b'miluoi to the outer ones. U'ke'ilu ein echad behem nifratz chaveroi. Ve'ein noistim lehem echad behem ele beis hasayim. And then everybody would only get a beis hasayim because you can't create a shayara. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Skip the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Chav Zayin for the moment, and let's go to Chav Ches. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Niri mi bachutz v'shava mi bifnim. If we could extend those walls, then it's a Niri mi bachutz v'shava mi bifnim scenario, which tells us that halachically we have to extend the wall. Hainu dekisha oimid b'sayf hagdoila, when you stand in the middle, nirish and isharu k'tzas kaisel b'sayf haktana, you see a partial wall going from there to the ktana. Va'af dekisha oimid b'sayf haktana ein hagifufim nirim. Now, even though you can't see them from the outer enclosures, halachically, we extend those gifufim and they penetrate the opening between the outer enclosure and the middle. And even if the walls do extend and bisect the walls of the bigger enclosure, if they're not distanced away from the other wall more than 3 tvachim, azamrin and lavud, then we would close the gap with lavud. V'areyu kesasim ad kitzei kasle aktana. V'imkein aregefufim nirim mibachotza mahani afliktana. Ois katnachov tes v'nidoin mishum lechi. Then we would apply the halacha of lechi. What is this talking about? Says the Mishnah Berurah, lechi ain't shaykhlin yanenu. We're not talking about lechis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ella the Ritzana Loimar, what the Mechaber means to say is the Kemoil Inyan Lechi Kaimelon the After Shava Bibiftim Kevet Sheniri Mibachutz Nidon Mishum Lechi. We're going to see when we learn the halachas of lechis, we're going to see that the same halacha exists over there. That Nira Mibachutz V'Shava Mibiftim allows us to create a lechi. Kein Linyanenu. After Ha'imid B'Sachak Nira Kaparitz Bibiluai. Even though from the vantage point, from the perspective of the outer enclosure, it looks like it's different bibiloy to the middle. From the middle, you do see partial walls, and if there would be nothing bisecting that wall, then we would extend it halachically. We would consider it to be gifufin, breaking off the outer, smaller enclosures from the middle as well. Now let's go back to the phrase that we skipped. So at the end of the second line, by the Ois Cotton Chav Zayin for the Mechaber said, "The Ozoi Seres Hagdoila Alaktana Ein Lekamon Siman Shin Ayin Dalet Sif Gimel." Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Chav Zayin. Tevois Elu Ad Tevois Sif Gimel Mukaf B'Seicha Shulchan Aruch Shel Oila Shabbos. In the text of the Shulchan Aruch that the Oila Shabbos had, this phrase was bracketed off. V'nochenu, and the Mishnah Berurah says that's really the way it should be. These words don't really belong here. The Chavetz Chaim said I could justify the text that we have that has those words, or it's on a limar. What the Mechaber would be saying is Kemoy the Kaimelo lekabon b'simin shinayin dalas of gimel le'inyan chatzik tanish and ifritz l'gdoila. When we learn the halachas of Eruv Chatzeros, and we're going to learn about two Chatzeros that are join each other. When are they considered that they're open to each other and when not? When we're going to see a similar halacha there. Over there, we're going to have a shaila. We have two chatzeros next to each other. One is bigger, one is smaller. Is one considered nifratz b'miluay to the other? And we're going to see this halacha, kein hu adin be'inyanenu. Okay, wow, Rabbi Isai. So that brings us to the end of Siman Shin Samach. We'll stop here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's, Refuas, Parnasset, Shidduchim, to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Tzedek, B'mhera v'yameinu amen. Be well.